And this call will be recorded. Hi, everybody. This is Aaron Murakami with eMediaPress.com and the Energy Science and Technology Conference. It's December 26th. Hope you all had a good Christmas and have a good New Year's coming up here. It's 12:03 p.m. We're going to go ahead and get started live with Eric Dollard on the call right now. Eric's website is ericpdollard.com. And in the right column, there is information on how you can make a donation. It is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and all of Eric's work is supported strictly by donations. So any help that you're able to give is needed at a time like this, especially throughout the winter with increasing bills and early next month, here in about a week and a half or so, myself and three others are going to be at the shop down there in Nevada to help Eric with some multiple different projects. And then from outside of the Spokane area, there'll be Griffin Brock and a couple others who are going to be there also working on different projects as well. And it's going to be, I don't know, maybe a little bit costly. It depends. We're going to try to cover everybody's food and that kind of stuff. And if anybody is able to make a donation to help cover any of those expenses, travel expenses, lodging, food, some parts and stuff like that, it'd be greatly appreciated. So recently, I have just released a live call from May 30 of last year. That's a little bit of a delay, year and a half, but Eric and I were doing these live calls about once a month last year, and then right before the conference we had to cut it off because we got busy with some projects, but we're going to start putting those out again, and I didn't really have time to edit, hour and a half to 2 hour audio and make slideshows out of it. And so recently on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Aaron Murakami, there is the recording from May 30th was released with a picture slideshow. Griffin Brock shared quite a bit of his work in that call as well. I'm in the middle of editing June 27th from last year, which is about 2 weeks right before the conference. And Eric is on there sharing quite a bit of stuff, but also Griffin Brock is going more into detail on the presentations he was going to be doing a couple weeks from then on his three-phase little miniature replica system, as well as the electrodynamic seismic forecasting. So that, as soon as I get that done, I'll be putting that out. And then, I don't know, what was it, maybe 2 weeks ago or so, we had a live call with Eric where, one of the main things we wanted to address is Eric's perspective on that Veritasium video, which is talking about what's happening with so-called, flow going on the outside of electrical wires, over certain distances once you close a switch, through a light bulb. I don't want to release that one yet until the June 27th from last year one is released, just so that those are in sequential order. And then this one will come out right after that. So the topic of this call, we'll open up for pretty much anything that Eric has, worked on, written, or presented on. But one of the main things is that we want to announce that there's a new book, paperback, that has just been released, and that is The Electromagnetic Induction and Its Propagation, a sequel to the work of Oliver Heaviside of the same title. This book is basically, this is a book form of the presentation that Eric gave on Heaviside's work at the 2020 conference of this exact same title. It's probably going to be maybe, well, at this point, probably maybe a 3-part paperback series. I'd like to give special thanks to Griffin Brock for helping to transcribe this book, and Simon Davies for helping with the formatting, that kind of editing. Otherwise, it'd take a lot longer for this to get done, and definitely takes a team, so thank you very much. If you go on to Amazon.com and you search for electromagnetic induction and its propagation, or you search anything under Eric Dollard's name, you'll see this book. I believe it's like $9.99 on Amazon. No, it's $14.95 on Amazon for the paperback. There's also the Kindle Amazon ebook version for $9.99. And then shortly we'll have it available as a PDF on emediapress.com as soon as Simon is able to put that up as an ebook, and we'll announce that. So, Eric, in this book, you want to, I don't know if you have a copy there in front of you. Do you want to kind of give maybe a synopsis, which is kind of what, or maybe read what's on the back cover, or I could read it, and then maybe you can kind of give a little feel for what's going on in each of the chapters?
Okay.
Something like that, or?
Well, you wanted to read the back cover?
Okay, you want me to go ahead and read that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this will be kind of a little overview of what the book is about. And this book is about 75 pages. It's real easy to read. There's very clear photographs. So the following chapters of electromagnetic induction and its propagation derive their basis from what has become known as the Faraday-Maxwell concept of electricity and its further advancement through the engineering efforts of J.J. Thomson and Oliver Heaviside. Electromagnetic theory, as it is presently understood, cannot be considered the creation of Oliver Heaviside, despite the prevalent notion that this was the creation of J.C. Maxwell, or can be considered the creation of Oliver Heaviside. As with all theoretical propositions, those of Heaviside were incomplete and lacking in certain details, as were those of Maxwell before him. Thus, these needed further development in order to be applied to electrical engineering. The work of Heaviside was to be advanced by the efforts of Arthur Kennelly and Charles P. Steinmetz, the two figures mostly responsible for electric power, telephone, television, and data transmission engineering. The objective of this text is to unify the symbols, units, and dimensions established by these important individuals into a comprehensive set of engineering formulations, free of the usual overly complex mathematics and elusive theories attendant to any engineering text in current use. It is believed by this author that in these chapters, a level of clarity has been achieved never before presented in a text of this kind. Accordingly, this can be regarded as an advancement into a comprehensive understanding of the phenomenon of electricity. This book is broken into three main chapters. Chapter 1, Rudiments of Electromagnetic Theory, and there's 6 subsections within that chapter. Chapter 2, Line Geometry in the Electric Medium, with 4 subsections in that chapter. And Chapter 3, Steinmetz Theory of Complex Electric Power, and there are 8 subsections within Chapter 3. Do you want to maybe kind of give an overview of, instead of hitting every single little subsection, just Chapter 1, 2, and 3, kind of give an overview, and then maybe we can kind of go over some questions of what this book is going to address?
Okay. Yeah, so Chapter 1 basically outlines and quantifies the Heaviside concept of electromagnetism. And then Chapter 2 relates to how to calculate this from a specific line geometry, pair of wires type of geometry that you typically see in utility systems and used to see in telephone systems, but not anymore, to come after the what's called the inductance and capacitance. And then Chapter 3 brings in the Steinmetz formulation of how to figure where the power flows in and out of the various components of the electric wave and what have you, and what actually constitutes electromagnetism. Now, I should point out that that modernistic physics, which has completely commandeered anything regarding electricity, has buried all of this information in just a morass of confusion and overly complicated mathematics, and basically, at this point in time, any concrete knowledge of electricity is completely lost. The evidence of this was the Veritasium livestock stampede, where literally hundreds of thousands of people demonstrated their ignorance on the subject, including the person that initiated the whole stampede, and then the kindred YouTubers that have their channels all interjected their complete lack of knowledge on the subject, and it was an absolutely glorious flail, truly a cattle stampede. So what I did, all of this was initiated a long, long time ago on my part, is a person named Philo Farnsworth III, who was the son of Philo Farnsworth II, which invented the television camera tube and the process of electronic television scanning, and a number of other very important tubes that led to a lot of the Cold War technology, klystrons, night vision tubes, all of these things can be credited to Philo Farnsworth II. Philo Farnsworth III, who was a friend of mine in Bolinas, had started me on getting back into the theory and mathematics of electricity so that I would have a better grasp of what I was encountering in my laboratory out at RCA and what have you. So that kind of started me on this, and that would be back in 1978, so that was a long time ago. So over all those decades, I struggled with various textbooks and what have you, and finally landed on Steinmetz. And Steinmetz was the gateway. And he managed to present the things in their proper form, which now have been put back into their improper form. And that furthered my ability to understand where Heaviside was at, because Heaviside basically is the father of electromagnetic theory, not Maxwell. That's not really very well understood. It's Heaviside. The Heaviside theory of electromagnetism is never really taught. What's presented as Maxwell's equations are actually Heaviside's equations, and then in the tradition of the academia, mathematicians and physicists, is all of that stuff is turned into a complete mathematical gobbledygook, so no one can really get a clue of what's going on. So fairly recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, I had reached a point in all my notes and what have you over the decades, the point where, okay, let's go back and see exactly how Heaviside viewed electromagnetism. Well, Heaviside did not make that project very easy because he loved all the convoluted mathematics too. Everybody at the time was completely endeared to making things as mathematically complex as possible and into one big self-serving religion, so to speak, that left everybody in the practical world out of the picture. Steinmetz and his contemporary Arthur Kennelly were trying to bring all of this back into the real world because electrical engineering was becoming a commercial imperative, and we couldn't be fooling around with stuff that just confused and bewildered. So I hit the Heaviside book for another time. I've gone through it over and over again, never really got that much out of it. And I focused on the chapter called Plane Electromagnetic Waves, and went through it over and over and over again and kind of dismantled it and looked for clues and what have you. And then lo and behold, the Heaviside theory of electromagnetism presented itself in a remarkably simple form. And then that is presented in the first chapter of this book. It's interesting that electromagnetism appears to have more of a corpuscular nature than a wave nature, and accordingly, that's why I established the unit of the Planck, which I think people that have encountered my Lone Pine writings have seen me use that term. It has actual dimensions. Those particular dimensions were encouraged by Steinmetz as the only really true dimensional representation of electricity, and energy was not considered a primary dimensional relationship in this particular representation, which, of course, is in complete contradistinction to modernistic physical science. There is no more electrical science. That has disappeared. It hasn't existed for a century. So taking the Heaviside view, so to speak, and applying it to the Steinmetz representation of electric power, which really is the only correct one. All of the formulations in every other textbook are wrong. 1 plus is positive sign is replaced with the negative, and the negative sign is replaced with the positive on the other part of the equation, and you could not get the right answer. I encountered this at the shipyard when I was dealing with these major reactive power flows between the shipyard and the substation, and did a number of experiments and what have you, which I think people that know me know that one of the results of those experiments was to trip the reverse power relays at the Richmond substation and knock the city and the shipyard and everything off the grid, which was kind of a successful experiment, even though the power company was not too happy about that. They were quite interested. So these are basically the elements in part 1, and then part 2 takes Maxwell's equations and reduces them with the help of Heaviside to very simple algebraic propositions that could be taught in first-year algebra in high school, or at least in my day. I wouldn't say they teach anything in school anymore, at least nothing that you want your kids to learn. But in my day, algebra and all those things were taught pretty rigorously in high school if you were pursuing a science or technology line of work. So I go through that, and all of this kind of really, I don't know how to put it, was kind of it was kind of like a revelation or what have you, to see all of this stuff that's become so obscure, so misunderstood, and in general meaningless, all of a sudden presented itself so completely and with such clarity that it was truly stunning. It kind of it created a euphoria. And then in part 3, it reduces all this stuff into basic transmission line representations. Throughout the book, actual transmission lines are used, and their pictures are usually presented in the first page of the book. So I take this material and apply it to the actual transmission lines, and then a number of things that I've been trying to figure out for decades, applying what I had learned putting the first 2 parts together, presented themselves rather clearly, the relationships between force, energy, power, and induction, and then that is turned into calculations on real power lines to get an idea of how much stored energy is in the power line, how much force is exerted on the conductors, and a very remarkable situation presented itself that if the load on a transmission line equals the natural impedance of the transmission line, no matter how much power you put through the transmission line, no force will be exerted on the conductors. And then the line is in a purely electromagnetic state. And I have been trying to arrive at that solution for quite some time. In fact, I kind of actually even made it a contest back in the early energetic forum days to see if anybody could arrive at that. And I could not arrive at that from any of Heaviside's writings or any engineering text, or there was no text that would tell me at what load impedance would the attractive force of dielectricity and the repulsive force of electromagnetism cancel each other. Well, I finally did arrive at that. And then I get into the natural impedance, reflected waves and transients and those type of things on the line, and at some point it got a little beyond me. So so I stopped at the point in which the basic reflected and forward waves and impedance mismatches and stuff were analyzed. So those chapters are yet to be transcribed and what have you, but part one is done. And so that's kind of the lineup of the whole thing. And so I don't know when part two or part three will be transcribed. But anyway, the stuff's written, and all of this was presented in my presentation by the same title 2 years ago at Aaron's conference.
Yeah, for the presentation, you can go to emediapress.com, and you can search products by category, either by author or presenter's name or by the conference and the year. But if you type in Eric Dollard 2020 or like Dollard Heaviside, you'll get the you'll find it pretty easy. That presentation was, I don't know, 3.5 hours, something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of the standard
maybe
4-hour block. Yeah.
Right. And those are all digital downloads at emediapress.com. I think in January, when we're down there, I'm bringing my professional overhead scanner that Griffin can help scan some of the notebooks. That'll go into part 2 and part 3. We have the template pretty much perfected for this 6x9 book, so it shouldn't take too long for Griffin to help out with that for us to put out part 2, then part 3. Those will probably be the priorities as far as anything in print. And then after that, we'll look at putting some of the other stuff in print. But that was, I think, in 2020. Yeah, you gave 2 presentations. One was the Heaviside one, and one was the Fortescue.
Yeah.
But yeah, this book is available on Amazon. I tried to search it by its title, just electromagnetic induction and its propagation, and everything except that came up. But if you type Eric Dollard in the subject for the paperback, then you'll see it. It'll be like maybe the 3rd or 4th result. Little black cover with white writing on it, and a blue picture, or a picture on the front cover with some insulators up on a crossarm. And let's see. And it looks like it ships usually in about 5 days. So if you ordered a copy of the paperback, if you're on Amazon Prime, it probably won't get to you until January 3rd or 4th. Another thing about this book is the other paperbacks we put on Amazon have worldwide distribution through all the Amazon networks. This particular one has it in some of the areas. Some areas it's not available, like Australia and Japan, at least not for a little while. The Verser algebra books are a little bit spendy in Amazon. That's because the only color option that was available, and it required color because of all the charts and graphs inside were colorized, color-coded. And it was kind of an expensive option. That one was available everywhere. Right when we put this in print on Amazon, there's a more budget color, which is, suitable for scanned in, drawings with color pencil coded drawings and stuff, which is a lot less expensive. But unfortunately, there's a couple countries out there that do not have that option in the Amazon system yet, but they will. Maybe at some point we can republish the Verser Algebra 1 and 2 books with that more budget color and bring the price down quite a bit. It's not going to happen anytime soon because we have other priorities. But in any case, so if you're in Australia and I think, Japan and a few other countries, if you want a copy of the paperback, you got to have somebody in the States send it to you, or, just get the paperback and print it out yourself, or the ebook. The Kindle ebook version, the formatting changed a little bit. I didn't know how to fix it. The Kindle system's a little bit weird. But the PDF that we'll put in emediapress.com will be an exact perfect replica of exactly what the paperback looks like. Once you get the PDF, you're welcome to print it out, put it in a binder. And again, I do want to mention that, the organization, EPD Laboratories, Inc., is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, funded solely by your donations. That makes this possible. Proceeds from these books go back to EPD Labs to help pay the bills. But on ericpdollard.com in the right column, if you scroll down, you can see the donation information. You can either donate by PayPal. I even have a Bitcoin link, QR code on there if you're able to donate by Bitcoin, or if you can send a check or a money order. There's a PO box in Spokane, Washington, and those have to come up here because since I'm the treasurer, I have to endorse the check, and then I mail it down to the post office box for the bank down in Nevada. So is there anything else you want to cover, Eric? And then maybe we can open up for some questions. And if we can, if anybody has questions, let's focus on this book rather than anything else. And then after this, we can maybe go into some other stuff. I'd kind of like to keep the call maybe to about an hour or so. So I still got, a good handful of hours to edit these other things. And if this call gets too long, it'll just take longer for me to get it out. But anything else you want to mention, Eric?
Well, I think that's it, pretty much. Probably what I should say is, should point out, I was just thinking, it crossing my mind, is the work of the great pioneers like Steinmetz, Kennelly, Heaviside, J.J. Thompson. All of that work is not complete. They had multiple areas in which to expend their energy, and they couldn't concentrate on certain things. There wasn't enough time. Steinmetz's books could be as long as 600 or 700 pages long, so you can imagine the expense and complexity of the editing. Some of the equations were several pages long, and when those guys passed away, that was pretty much the end of any advancement in the knowledge of electricity, and it was very incomplete. Units and dimensions were cockeyed, and then the physicists got in there and really just mucked everything up. I mean, just trashed it. So there was no way that anybody could continue that work. So when I landed destitute in Lone Pine some years back after Landers was destroyed and began this writing effort, the objective was to start from the beginning and completely rewrite the book on electricity. And basically, I've succeeded in that. Is all the units and dimensions are correct. The symbols are all consistent and unified, even though it took virtually every letter in the Latin and Greek alphabet to do that. It has been done. Everything fits together. A lot of the meaningless coefficients and constants and things that get stuck in there have been put to the side. All the dimensions of every expression are completely laid out. They're not. There's no cancellations because there's centimeters in the numerator and denominator, and crossing them out and making numeric. That's not correct. I don't think that any of this has ever been done other than by myself, and so I think both the Heaviside work and the Fortescue work that I've been doing in the past several years represents a finalization of the theory of electricity and its application to electrical engineering, and quite possibly open some doors to revitalize the science of electricity, particularly with what we're discovering with the cosmic induction generator and the Tesla transformers, is opening up a whole new world there also. So if there was adequate funding, this stuff could really move forward. But adequate funding this day and age is there's a lot of zeros after the one, and it's just not, society can't support that kind of stuff anymore. So what I have to do at this point is pretty much rely on getting transcribed what I've already written, which is several thousand pages of finished notes. So that's part of what Aaron and Griffin are going to be working on when they come down here. So basically, I don't really need to write another thing at this point. The writing has pretty much all been done. What I want to do at this point is finish the physical projects, get laboratories constructed and all that stuff, but that kind of effort occurs in $100,000 increments, which tends not to be available. So that's a bit of a complication. So I think I'll close at that point, and then questions.
Okay. I want to mention a couple of things first. So with, Simon Davies, who goes by DR Green in Energetic Forum, he helps me with a lot of customer service and web stuff and some of the book formatting. And I'd like to mention his website so you can help support his work, because he's done a lot to help support my efforts in working with Eric and getting his work out. And his website is teslascientific.com, and he has both free calculators and also calculators you can buy for calculating all kinds of Tesla coil stuff, a bunch of different calculators, and the answers in those come out to the same thing that Eric teaches in the like the Colorado Springs presentation and that kind of thing. And I'd also like to mention Griffin Brock's website, because he's very instrumental in supporting these efforts. Griffin's website is griffingBrock.com. G is his middle initial, griffingBrock.com, and he's regularly posting updates on his work, different projects, and there's also a donate button on there if anybody wants to help donate directly to Griffin. He puts the money right into his projects, and he works fast, and he does, his work is impeccable, and so definitely support them. I'd also like to mention, do you want me to mention anything about the titles of the papers that you may be presenting on for next year's conference?
Well, that's still kind of tentative, so it's probably a little early for that.
Okay. So
it might be good to point out what it is that we're trying to get going here in this work episode. One of the most important things is to get a regular telluric broadcast transmitting from here. It'll start off on low power. So Griffin Brock has designed and constructed the Tesla transformers for that. We have some rather massive underground electrodes here, and so part of the effort will be getting leads connected to those and bringing them to a terminal point where we can transmit into the ground. And then there's a small World War II Navy transmitter that will get going and try to get a regular broadcast going from here. It'll start at 40 watts, which is not a lot, but if money and what have you presents itself, then we can get the power up to the kilowatt level. And then the other thing that I'm going to try to make a first step on here is a thing I call the music television, which relates to the musical seismograph. It's a type of television display that allows you to visualize music or other combinations of frequencies and tones that produces some incredibly remarkable images when you put the early music in, like Bach and Handel and their predecessors. It actually takes on shapes of things that look like they're alive. We might be able to get the first stage of that going. So with the amount of money and resources at hand, I think those are probably two things that can be finalized here. I think we can pull these two projects off fairly well without having to do any more improvements on the building. So that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, a couple of things I want to mention is when Eric is talking about the experiments with the cosmic induction generator and the different things we're seeing there that will continue, on that path. There's some interesting stuff that's going to be coming up. This year in July, Eric and I co-presented on a presentation called The Borderlands of Nikola Tesla's Resonant Transformer. I believe that's the title. And it was, several hours long, and that's available on emediapress.com. You can see how the primary secondary was not used. It was just an interesting extra coil configuration and some plasma demonstrations, making different gases glow at colors not associated with those gases, and some other interesting phenomenon. Also, when Eric is talking about Griffin building these transformers, so the donations that have, that are coming in for EPD labs, that, the priority is maintain the building expenses, property tax and insurance and all that kind of stuff. But so what I did was I purchased all the parts for the transformers, 2 identical ones that basically kind of look like the extra current coils on the or the potential coils maybe on the Borderlands one, but these are
the current coils.
The current coils in the Borderlands presentation, these are quite a bit bigger because the frequency is quite a bit lower. We're operating around, 7.5 megacycle or something, and these are, down around 2 or so.
Yeah.
And so so Griffin has already built these transformers, and these are all parts which are paid for by donations that came into EPD Labs. So this is an example of how your donations are helping. Griffin sent me some pictures. I'll see if he can send me some others, and I'll put those into this slideshow presentation so that you can watch it on YouTube of what's actually being done. And so even though it seems like not a lot's going on, there is work moving forward, and Griffin did an amazing job with these. And these are going to be coming to the shop here in a few weeks to move forward with that project. And then let's see. Okay, well, I guess I can go ahead and open up for questions if anybody has any questions specific to the book. And depending on time, we can go into questions of some other stuff. So if you do have a question specifically about this book that we just kind of gave an overview on, and again, this is part 1 of what will probably be a 3-part series. And, those 2 parts will come out in the next, over the next few months. So go ahead and hit 5* if you have a question specific to this book. Hit 5* and I can go ahead and unmute you, and you can ask your question. Let's see. Okay, we got David in Michigan. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Hey, David, go for it. You're unmuted.
Yeah. Hi, Aaron. Can you hear me?
Yeah, just fine.
Yeah. Eric was talking about the significance of, I forgot who he said it was, if it was either Steinmetz's calculation on a plane wave or Heaviside's calculations. Could you repeat what you were describing about the significance of those calculations in regards to plane waves?
Well, it wasn't referring to sine waves. Sine waves is kind of a shadow representation of alternating current, and it's best to not represent the things the way this. It's a circular function, not a projection of a circular function. I think what you might be referring to is the Steinmetz power equation, which is pointed out in that chapter in the theory and calculation of alternating current phenomena, that all mathematical representations of alternating current power were wrong, because in the electrical system, the electrical utility system, let's say, we call it 60 cycles per second, but the power is not 60 cycles per second. The power is 120 cycles a second. So that throws everything off. That makes in every textbook, for the most part, makes the equations for power useless for anything more advanced other than just basic calculations. And if you try to use the improper form when you're getting in the more advanced mathematical representations or theory, everything turns out wrong. So, some reason, not too many textbook writers or what have you picked up on that, and or if they have, they did it in a roundabout way, and they don't discuss the fact that the power is 120 cycles a second and not 60 cycles a second. Maybe I can give a more physical representation of that. The voltage and the current are 60 cycles a second, but their product is 120 cycles a second. Now, that's something that seems to have a bit of common sense to it because 2 times 60 is 120, and you have two 60s, but mathematically it's really not that simple. But if we take a light bulb that warms up instantly and cools off instantly, kind of like a gas tube of some kind or something that, like neon or what have you, that has a fairly fast response time, and we connect that to 60-cycle alternating current, we will find that the light flashes at 120 times a second. The reason it does that is because it flashes at the same brightness on the positive end of the cycle as it does on the negative end of the cycle from the 60-cycle standpoint. That's kind of, I think, what you might have been wondering about. I'm not certain.
Yeah, to some degree. So the way I've always seen it is that in normal AC circuit, it's just reversing the direction of the current 60 times per second, but you're saying it's not quite that simple?
No, it's not when it comes to calculating the power.
Okay.
And the thing that is important to remember is the only thing that really has any concrete existence in electrical engineering, at least relating to the public utility system and all of that, is power. It has to be remembered that what we call voltage and current are mathematical abstractions and don't necessarily have the same definitions in every circumstance. That's what's pointed out in part 1 of this book, is what all of this stuff means and what's real and what's a mathematical fiction is addressed in the book. And power is what's actually going on, and voltage and current or voltage and amperage, what have you. I mean, even the names themselves kind of drift around. They're merely mathematical fictions to facilitate calculation.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. I'll check it out in the book.
Okay. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and hit 5-star. Let's see. So about 20 people on the call, so that's good. Hopefully we get some more questions here. Just hit 5-star and I can go ahead and unmute you. Okay, if nobody has any questions, I don't know, do you want to keep going on the book, Eric, or just open up for anything else related to any of the works?
It's 20 people and nobody has anything to say. I guess whatever I must have said must not have been, either it's been thoroughly understood or it's just complete gibberish.
So let's see, we have Franco in Brazil. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead, Franco.
Okay, hello guys.
Hello.
Thank you, Aaron and Eric. I have a question about specifically about the Heaviside work. Eric have mentioned a lot of times about the law of continuity of energy and the law of conservation of energy. And I want to know is exactly the definition and the difference between the two concepts. The two laws, the law of conservation of energy and the law of continuity of energy.
Well, the law of continuity of energy is I think Heaviside's trying to keep the situation open to maybe more novel or abstract definitions, where the law of conservation of energy basically tells you that whatever energy you have has to stay energy in that particular space and time. So Heaviside presents when he talks about the law of continuity of energy that if energy disappears in space, but reappears at another time. This kind of goes back to what Aaron and I got into in that presentation, where Aaron was talking about time, and we took a clip out of that movie, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. In Heaviside's idea, if energy disappears in the space in front of you at a specific time and reappears in another time or in another space or what have you, that's what he called the law of continuity of energy. He pointed out he didn't really like that representation, but he had to do it in order to kind of get his notion across that's a little more involved than kind of the way it's accepted. Also, it's important to point out that the guy that conceived the law of conservation of energy was harassed to the point of having a complete nervous breakdown because the so-called scientists of his time completely rejected the idea. I think the guy's name was Mayer. He may have even committed suicide. None of the people that presented any of the stuff that we regard as important today in basic electricity and electronics was accepted at its time, and the people that all the way back to Galvani were just beaten into the ground, and then after they were dead, then that was okay. Just like after Tesla died, then the Supreme Court decided that he really was the inventor of radio, but he had to die first. So energy is a fetish. Energy is only a transitional state, as is demonstrated in Part 3 of, which isn't out yet, but it is in the presentation by this title. Energy is a transitional or in-between state, and it should not be regarded as a primary fundamental entity. The primary fundamental entities are the power and the induction. The power given in watts and the induction given in the Planck. But energy is not really what's going on. So when we talk about law of conservation of energy, where energy is not necessarily what we're getting at, and it's no longer because of the Einsteiners and the Hawkings and the Feynmans and the Heisenbergs and all the rest of that ilk. We're in this field, it's no longer electricity in matter, as it was to J.J. Thomson. It's energy in matter. So that kind of ended electricity at that point, and then this energy as a manifestation of matter took over, and then that gave us the delusional mind virus that electricity is electrons flowing in wires, which is complete nonsense.
Is there any relation with this law of continuity of energy with the dark zone stuff, the neutral zone that you guys are observing on those experiments?
You mean in the light bulbs?
Yeah, when the two fields are superimposed and this that dark zone appears in the middle, is there any relation with the law of continuity of energy?
Well,
is it an example?
All of that starts to completely fall apart. So the situation is, when you're doing measurements on this, is when you achieve resonance in these transformers, and you match the transmitter to the transformer so that it can deliver, its maximum energy into the transformer, it doesn't come back, and there's no evidence of it. The energy disappears. So it's gone back into some other form that preceded energy. Now, that would, by the law of reciprocity, that would make you think that it's also possible, for energy to come out of this space rather than go into it. But there's a lot more experimenting and theorizing that would have to be done to get to the bottom of this, which is very expensive and very detailed. So we took it about as far as we could with with what was available to us. But it shows. I mean, it's clear. I mean, I think it's been shown in a number of videos that that when this Tesla transformer is brought into resonance, that you can just keep loading that transmitter into it, and there's no evidence of where that energy is going. There's no light, there's no heat, there's no motion, there's no radio waves, there's nothing. Energy's just gone. So then all of a sudden the law of conservation of energy doesn't have any meaning anymore.
Mm-hmm. So this disappearing energy apparently is continuing in another dimension?
It appears that it's vanishing, but there's no, we can't say one way or another. It would be it would be improper to make any statements of that kind. All we know is the energy cannot be accounted for within, the measurements and ability, of perception and what have you, the eyes and the ears and the nose and all that. There's no smoke, there's no heat, there's no light, nothing moves, there's no sound, there's no radio waves, light waves, goes away. And that is an interesting term that presents itself in the Heaviside-Steinmetz equation, which is developed in this book series, and that equation is presented in part 1, which is available. There's a term in the equation that that represents real power rather than reactive power, but there's no input or output, or it's kind of hard to say. It's like a mystery term. And that's what's interesting, and that might be what's going on with the energy disappearance in the Tesla transformer, is that particular term of the equation, which is what I had a name for it. Basically it's the electromagnetic term. So electromagnetism is not what you've been taught. You've got to go through Heaviside's view of that. Electromagnetism only exists in transient states. It never exists in a continuous state. In a DC circuit, there is no electromagnetism. Even though you have electric power, there's no electromagnetism. Electromagnetism only exists in a transient state as a corpuscle, which occupies an interval of time and an interval of space. And that could be, taking the quantum notion, you could take that down to one elemental Planck, or a Planck length, or a Planck time. I have heard these terms used by physicists. So it appears that electromagnetism has some kind of quantum nature, in that you can only subdivide it down to a certain point, and then it starts to present itself as being somewhat atomistic, in that you have a corpuscle of electricity, and it cannot be divided any further than that. And the size of that corpuscle would be determined by the size of the Faraday lines of force that give rise to that corpuscle. But in order to prove these things as scientific facts, there would have to be a lot more work going on. But mathematically, it does present itself that way, and it agrees quite closely with the ideas of J.J. Thomson, who was never given credit for the fact that he really was the father of all of this stuff that later on became quantum and relativity and energy-mass relationships. All of that was developed by J.J. Thomson, and Einstein and all of those people just basically plagiarized him. And Thomson, even though he lived a long life, he was pretty much written out of the very field that he created, atomic science, was completely written out, and got rather bitter about it, like most of these guys did when they were written out of their own field, so to speak. So even though he's regarded as discoverer of the electron, he denounced it. I wrote a very small book called The Revival of the Science of Electricity in the Digital Age, and that's also available on Amazon. And it shows how the science of electricity got trashed, and what the notions are that are prevalent in people's head that completely obviate any possibility of understanding electricity. And there's no mathematics involved in that at all, and it's heavily referenced, so that you can go back and actually read the statements of all of these famous people and how it doesn't have any connection to what people believe today.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can I make another question?
Yeah.
About the size of these lines of force, this size is something related to the Planck constant?
Yeah.
Something to do?
Yeah. Now, I can't say exactly how, but mathematically all these pieces seem to start to fit together.
Mm-hmm. And all lines of force have the same size, the same diameter, I mean?
Yeah, assuming that you can still use the notions of diameter, and length and what have you. Because once you start to get into, molecular dimensions, those things start to kind of change their meaning.
Mm-hmm. So independent of the pressure or the tension that those lines are exerting, it will have the same size?
They're all the same. They all have unit value or quantum value, if you want that term.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And that was the notion of J.J. Thomson.
Mm-hmm.
So those notebooks, I still have to have those notebooks transcribed before they get published. But I went through Thomson's work and got rid of all the mathematical gibberish and all the things that physicists do to make it so that you can't understand what they're saying. It was an extremely difficult process. But I managed to actually get in engineering form, I managed to get written down in his engineering mathematical form, managed to get his ideas down about the lines of force and the unity of them, and the fact that there's no separation between magnetism and dielectricity. They're really ultimately the same thing. And Heaviside and Steinmetz would have been inclined to look at things the same way, but they were going more after the fact that the electrical transmission was starting to become a necessity in the commercial world. So Heaviside was driven by, the fact that they spent a fortune putting these undersea telegraph cables in, and then all of a sudden they couldn't send the signals through. And Steinmetz was dealing with the situation that these big power lines and generating stations would just suddenly explode into a fusillade of sparks and fire and flames, and nobody could figure out why. So that's where Heaviside and Steinmetz were basically trying to deal with that problem, where J.J. Thomson would have been more your pure academia, physical scientist and natural philosopher. So he would, be more inclined just to go off on pure theory and not problems involved in transmission and commercial enterprise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Eric. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Franco. Okay, Levi in South Dakota. Okay, go for it.
Hello?
Yeah, you're good.
Hi, Aaron. Hi, Eric. Can you hear me, Eric?
Yeah.
I wanted to mention, I think we're just shy. We understand every word you say clearly. I just want to make a couple quick comments. And correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, okay? I want to mention my introduction to understanding electricity through grade school growing up was that we were taught all about the electron, and that the electron flowed through conductive metals like copper, like it's water through a pipe. In fact, water pressure was incorrectly compared to voltage. There were no lines of force. And then once I found Dollard's work, I learned the truth, which is the energy flows outside the wires, and the physical lines of force expand and contract in space. holding the energy like electrical momentum, the EMF and the displacement current, the total dielectric induction psi. And then the last comment I wanted to say is, would you say the lines of force look like a spider web or perhaps ship's rigging emanating from the circular tubular copper line?
Well, that's the way they're presented, but it wouldn't be a good idea to commit myself to any physical definition of something that we really have no, direct access to.
That's free. That's fair.
But again, in any of these circumstances, I would refer back to J.J. Thomson because I think his formulation of what the lines of force constituted and or what constituted the lines of force and what have you was probably the most accurate.
Okay. I've got another comment that's separate. You mentioned Einstein and the physicists and the modernism that we're plagued by. The photon, according to the physicists, a photon equals a massless particle, which is oxymoronic, and with emphasis on the moronic part was my second comment. I wanted to read a small thing. I won't waste too much of your guys' time, but I did prepare this a little bit. It's a story about Steinmetz and General Electric with Henry Ford. Have you heard it, Eric?
Well, I know that Henry Ford and Steinmetz had some kind of connection with something, but I doubt if it was his electric car, but I'm not certain. But
let me read this real quick. It'll take me less than 20 seconds. It was a business deal between the two of them. The Wizard of Schenectady, if I pronounced that correct, the little giant, he had to help out Henry Ford. Just give me one moment. Now, this may be an urban legend from General Electric, but it's a good story. Bear with me. Okay, here's the text. My father, Bert Scott, who was an employee of the Henry Ford for many years, related to me the story behind that meeting. Technical troubles developed with a huge new generator at Ford's River Rouge plant. His electrical engineers were unable to locate the difficulty, so Ford solicited the aid of Steinmetz. When the little giant arrived at the plant, he rejected all assistance, asking only for a notebook, pencil, and cot. For 2 straight days and nights, he listened to the generator and made countless computations. Then he asked for a ladder, a measuring tape, and a piece of chalk. He laboriously ascended the ladder, made careful measurements, and put a chalk mark on the side of the generator. He descended and told his skeptical audience to remove a plate from the side of the generator and take out 16 windings from the field coil at that location. The corrections were made and the generator then functioned perfectly. Subsequently, Ford received a bill for $10,000 signed by Steinmetz for General Electric. Ford returned the bill, acknowledging the good job Steinmetz had done, but respectfully requesting an itemized statement, because 10 grand is a lot. Steinmetz replied as follows: making chalk mark on generator, $1. Knowing where to make the mark, $9,999, totaling to 10 grand. Have you heard that story?
Yeah, I've heard. I recall that one.
Okay, sorry if I wasted your time then. I just thought it was a great one.
No, well, probably what it is, see, one of the coils probably had the wrong number of turns on it and was causing a kink in the wave. And I have dealt with situations like that where at the shipyard where, some jerk-off electrician came on to a ship for an important government project, and they needed to get this ship going. And what this guy would do is he would take all the labels off all the leads on a generator and what have you. He'd tear half the goddamn ship apart so that you would be committed to hiring him, to put it all back together again. And then
he was making work. That's all.
Yeah, and then what he would do is then he'd go get high on meth and disappear for 2 weeks. And
I figured that part was coming.
Leave everybody holding the bag. So that's why that's why there was Eric Dollard. So
that's right, to pick up the pieces after it all falls apart.
Where's that Dollard guy? Where is he? Get him here.
Save me.
And I would kind of have to do the same thing as Steinmetz.
Sure. You got to calculate that.
I'd have 12 unmarked wires hanging out of the side of the generator, and they wanted to get that ship out the next day. And,
on the timeline.
And who's going to who's going to figure out
Save the
wires
day.
are all the same color, and I have my methods, and I get those things all phased out and get them all connected back up, and that's one thing. What my reputation was is every time I closed the switch, the lights would come on, and other people couldn't say that.
Well, as long as the transformers keep humming, everybody seems to be happy. That's for sure. At 120 cycles, like you just illuminated. One of the other questions I wanted to ask is, I'm sorry I don't have any questions about your new work, by the way. I'm excited to read your book, and then I'll have more questions. But my other question, which is unrelated, well, let me just also point out, I think people need to see more of the experiments, that people are ignorant of the old school experiments. I know, Eric, you've done all of them, and so, but unfortunately, kids today are just not shown any of these electrical experiments. I know that Aaron and your work is a huge part of lighting people up so they understand, so we don't have all this electrical ignorance. But I wanted to mention Faraday's experiment, which involves a 12-volt battery. It's a DC circuit. It involves 2 copper coils, which are sharing an iron ring. It's got a light bulb on the far coil. When the switch is open and closed only during that brief moment, the bulb on the far side lights up, which indicates or demonstrates transformer EMF induction. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Does that sound correct? Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring that up because I don't think people are aware of these simple experiments. I had to see that before I understood that the simple act of closing the switch is the moment when that impulse gets sent electrically.
Well, see, that's what Faraday and Maxwell, the important things they introduced was the dimension of time that did not exist prior to them.
Right.
And without the dimension of time, you can't have power.
Exactly, right. Or you'd have infinite power with an infinitesimal amount of time.
Well, but that's still time, right? As soon as you say time,
right, of course
time.
It is. You have to have time, of course, of course.
So, I was lucky enough that when I went to school in the late 50s to the mid-60s, that even in junior high school, you know, we had Crookes tubes and Odin coils, and and I was trying to make my own little, mercury vapor lights and diodes and stuff out of pieces of glass, and what's that?
I heard someone else.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I kind of, everything was there to do this stuff, and I was already doing a lot of it at home when I was a kid. That's the education that children need. And one thing that you kind of brought up, I don't know where the money would come from to do it. I would love to have the money to be able to set this place up to do a lot of this stuff.
I understand. You actually have the know-how to do it as well.
Well, but the thing is really, well, there's certain things I want to do, but I can't do everything.
Of course not. You need some muscle and legs.
Some giant military, or commercial laboratory. But basically, the important thing that really needs to be done at this point is to go all the way back to the beginning and duplicate everything all over again.
Exactly.
Until you've done
they're not making tubes anymore, are they?
About.
Right.
But that's none of that. It's all digital now.
It is. It's.
I mean, all you got to do is just go out in the street, look at the utility system. The poles are all crooked. The cross arms are crooked. Nothing's hooked up right. It's where's the engineers? There's nobody. There are no more engineers. No
one's paying attention except you, and no one's listening to you. No offense. I mean, people are listening to you, but I mean, you should have a megaphone. But unfortunately, I read your paper about these large Walmart supercenters and them causing all these oscillations and all these random frequency vibrations through the power line that are causing problems because they're digital. The original electrical network, of course, was intended to be light bulbs and just a motor humming. Things have gotten more complicated. Right. And as a result, there's issues. And you mentioned I'm sorry, I'm kind of drawing a blank. Y connection versus delta connection. It seems like we're under attack because it just doesn't make any sense why they'd be doing that way with the Y connection. But I'm kind of getting aside. I just want to ask you a couple more questions, Eric, and then I'll let someone else take some shots at you.
Okay.
My first question is earthquake detection services. You used to be able to detect earthquakes way before they were happening. Can you get into that anymore, or maybe make some money on that or something?
Well, that project stalled due to the lack of the money
Funds.
to go any farther.
I understand. Okay.
So in order to develop our facilities, I mean, we have all the parts and we have the easements and what have you, but to build, the structures to hold the equipment and get wire up on poles and
power,
that stuff's all, that all gets up into the blocks of $100,000, and we don't have blocks of $100,000 to work with. Maybe if we're lucky, like recently we get a block of $10,000. That's
nice.
To get the wire for the electroseismic sensing antenna, which is on the floor in front of me right now. 5 miles of copper wire, $7,000.
Yeah. So you spend as much time trying to find money as doing actual work in the field then. Like that's half the battle is just getting the funds.
Well, the problem is because there's no developed laboratory, and I don't have any more than 3 110 circuits here, which now are all loaded up with space heaters because I'm living in a walk-in refrigerator. You have to remember that I live in a garage.
Sure.
I mean, it might be an improvement from living in the back of my car stuck to the ice in the backside of the Sierras, but it's still,
no doubt.
Still, so what does it cost to put electrical system in the building to
a lot of capital
fire stuff up? Well, it's $30,000 to the contractors and $30,000 to the power company. $60,000.
Why aren't the local governments that are sitting on a fault line in California very interested in you? That doesn't make sense to me. Because if you're able to detect it,
why don't you take a look at the people that constitute those local governments, and I'll answer your question.
That's a good point. That's valid.
Maybe
it's just too bad because that's really interesting. Okay, one last thing, and then I'll get off the phone. If I type in Google right now, who invented radio, it says Guglielmo Marconi. I'm of the opinion that Nikola Tesla invented radio. Do you agree?
Yeah, not totally, but...
You said yourself that they reversed the decision in the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Well, Marconi was using Tesla circuits. And,
yep, he was.
The problem is all of the guys that were fooling with that stuff then did not have the idea of wavelength or frequency. So, sure, you can get something to transmit and receive, but there's no way to distinguish between whose transmitter and receiver is doing what. Everything responds, does the same. There's no wavelength or frequency. It was just impulses. And Tesla was the one that created the idea of using a definite frequency. But also there was a Catholic priest in the state of Pennsylvania that about the same time, probably inspired by what people were learning from what Tesla was doing, that actually built a tune system. And Marconi basically just stole it from everybody.
Well, Tesla was demonstrating for all the morons, and probably people were just hijacking his stuff. I don't know. I was just Tesla, I feel like, got the short end of the stick in several ways, and I feel like that's an active form of censorship when they tell me that Guglielmo Marconi is the inventor, and I'm pretty sure that it was Tesla. I mean, like I said, it's an opinion. The last 2 things I wanted to mention about Tesla is his disc rotor motor. He claimed he could get 20 horsepower per pound out of it. Do you think that's BS, or was he being honest about that?
You're talking about the bladeless turbine.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, people build them, and it sure seems to work, so I can't see anything wrong with that idea.
Well, last thing, the Tesla oscillator, it's his earthquake machine, his resonator. It was a mechanical piston with air springs. The piston was linked electromechanically to 2 inductors, so when the thing was wiggling back and forth, it would achieve resonance one way or another. In Tesla's writing, he claimed that he could create a preponderance of force in one direction electrically to create a new form of direct current. I'm curious to know if there's anything there that's of use, if that's like how...
Well, that's fundamental to all of Tesla's transmission methodologies, is the Newtonian concept of action and reaction no longer apply. And that's where this law of continuity of energy presents itself, rather than the conservation of energy, or could present itself, is the reason the thing exerts a force without a reaction is in one part. All this stuff has to happen cyclically, and if in one part of the cycle the so-called energy is electric, and the other part of the cycle the so-called energy is mechanical, that's how he manages the trick, the Newtonian idea of reaction. And then one thing that I need to point out is Newton deserves just as much blame as Einstein does.
I agree.
Completely leading everybody off the track. The guy was a rabid paranoid. It's just Newton did is incalculable damage to natural philosophy, and then Einstein finished it off for him.
No doubt. He was a fraud, in my opinion. Einstein was a fraud. All right, I won't take any more of your time. Eric, I love your work. I'm following you. Please carry on.
Okay.
Okay, take care.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. I'd like to get wrapped up here, maybe about 5 minutes or so. Let's see. David in Michigan. Okay, go for it. We can kind of keep it brief.
Yeah. Hey there, Eric again. Just because I've heard J.J. Thomson's name brought up a few times in this talk, I'm currently reading his book, Electricity and Matter, and I'm at the part where he's trying to describe momentum in regards to an electrified point and a magnetic pole, and he uses 3 coordinates on a grid to describe this, A, B, and P, and says that the lines of or tubes of force would run perpendicular to this plane, but I'm just having a hard time visualizing what he's actually describing here. He ends up using the analogy of a gyroscope on the end of a balance point to kind of illustrate it further, but it's kind of just escaping me what's actually being described here. Could you elaborate on that at all, if you happen to be familiar with it?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that book, and I have the same problem. Is the way that Thomson presents things is not. It's kind of hard to get a grasp on it. He's trying to make a model of something, but the concept is important. That when lines of force are in motion, there is a momentum involved there, and they tend to give the appearance of a physical mass, even though there isn't something physical. So, as far as this whole, energy mass equivalency, that's what it first really presented itself long before Einstein was doing any of this. So he's trying to give a physical model, of the gyroscope on the end of a, if I remember right, I kind of see the picture. I got the book here somewhere, but I always found that J.J. Thomson's representations, I had a lot of trouble with them myself, and I had to kind of take the overview and kind of pass over details.
I understand. That's fine. I'll keep reading and then maybe come back to it eventually to see what he was getting at.
Yeah, you got to go through the book, and what I found what's important with these things is particularly his work, because it's really hard to take his mathematical symbolisms and turn it into anything that has any uniformity or consistency or what have you. He'll use the variable x in one chapter for one thing and then use the variable x for something else. The dimensions are not complete. Most of physicists' work's trash that way. There's left out dimensions in there. They're never presented, like per centimeters and per seconds, and they just leave those things out. And so what you got to do is you kind of got to go through, rewrite all the equations, try to come up with maybe some more unified, variables, turn them into things that, like I did, like they would use energy as E in physics, but, you can't do that in electrical engineering because E, means either potential or EMF. So you use W and just keep fooling with it, and then at some point you'll get a revelation. Oh, I get it. It'll be a struggle, but you got to take notes and you got to kind of fool with the ideas. You can't just read it like you're reading a novel.
No, I guess not. I'll continue to reread and see what comes to me.
Yeah, and experiment. like I say, if he has a mathematical thing, write it down and kind of write down its derivation. And if you keep doing that, then at some point it hits you.
Great. I will do so. I'm also reading Steinmetz's Elementary Waves and Transients. I think it's called.
Discharges, waves, and impulses?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
And I was reading where he described the behavior between current and voltage in an AC circuit that includes a capacitor. And if you switch the direction of a circuit with a capacitor in it fast enough, you get these peaks of incredibly high current. And then alternatively, if you open the switch on a direct current line fast enough, you get a peak of high voltage, I think is how it went.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, is there any machine? It seems like in regards to getting highly switched current with a capacitor in the circuit, it seems like there should be some machine that could take advantage of that nowadays. Is there any machine that generates current in that way by just switching?
Well, the practical the manifestation is the ignition coil in a car.
Oh yeah.
Which I think originally was Tesla's invention. So what you do is you connect a current to the so-called primary coil, and that builds up a magnetic field, and then you break that current really rapidly. Then the magnetism's got to go somewhere. It's got to get out. Well, it can't get out of the primary, so it gets out of the secondary, and because the EMF is compounded by the number of turns, then it turns the low voltage, high current manifestation of energy into high voltage, low current manifestation of energy, which is the same energy in both cases. And then what was popular for a while, they seem to kind of disappear, but I think the stuff's still available, is the capacitive discharge automobile ignition, which really enhances the performance. And that's the same thing, as you charge a capacitor to a very high potential, and then you slam this thing across the low impedance of the primary ignition coil, and that produces a very high magnitude current pulse, which then in turn produces a very intense magnetic pulse, which then in turn produces a very high EMF in the secondary. So both of Steinmetz's propositions present themselves in basic automobile ignition systems.
Okay. And yeah, actually, come to think of it, I guess Aaron has a video or something about Subaru ignition coils that maybe I'll check out. Was that correct, Aaron?
Yeah, that one was just my plasma ignition being applied to a wasted spark ignition system. And I figured out how to keep the polarity the same on all four terminals by using two of those coils kind of in series. Because I was just trying to get my plasma ignition to work on the EJ2598 Subaru Legacy engine. And you can only do that if all the polarities are the same, and I figured it out. But ignitionsecrets.com, or on eMediaPress.com, that Ignition Secrets package is the basic, my method of doing the high-speed impulse, and the Subaru coil one is more specific, just a specific application of that to that kind of engine.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That's all I got for now.
Okay, thanks, David. Let's see, we'll take maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll go ahead and finish the call. If your number is ending in 5848, I'm going to unmute you. If you can introduce yourself, say your name and where you're from, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hello. I have a question. Well,
yeah.
I have
what
a
is your
question
name?
about. My name is Calvin. I'm from California.
Calvin.
There
okay,
was a mention of a Crookes tube that Dollard mentioned earlier, and the thing about it is, that reminds me of a rumor I heard that Griffin Brock was trying to make a Tesla X-ray tube, and apparently it was successful. And with the Crookes tube specifically, there are certain dangers with it. Edison noted that there was an assistant of his that suffered from necrosis of the hand due to the amount of X-rays. And the thing is my main question is, are in the Tesla sense, right? As with Tesla's technique, which is I think a single wire system, not a dual wire, like how it works in a Crookes tube. Are the rays from this going to be as dangerous, or are there going to be any differences?
Well, it seems like the Tesla X-rays are not harmful, at least as long as you keep the power level at a reasonable level, where the reflected X-rays are damaging. But a lot of that depends on, for the reflected X-rays, the electrode material and the amount of current. And so in Crookes' day, there was never really enough current to make this stuff particularly harmful, and the electrodes were usually made out of some kind of light metal, which didn't really produce hard X-rays. But later on, with hot cathodes and tungsten anodes and what have you, then the stuff started to become dangerous. It's an interesting thing to note here is that Donald Trump's uncle, John Trump, did a lot of work in this stuff and came up with some things that we've become interested in, that electrostatic rather than electromagnetic generators, which are applicable to the Tesla turbine, is Trump was heavily involved in building very high voltage and high power electrostatic generators, and he for medical X-rays for cancer therapy and what have you, and he at some point in his work shifted from the 2 terminal to the 1 terminal, just like Tesla did, and also Trump's uncle was the guy that they sent in to analyze Tesla's papers after Tesla died. So there's some interesting connections there that kind of have a bit of tie to the socio-political quagmire that we're dealing with today.
So there, Calvin?
Yeah. No, that answers it. Actually, I have another thing to add, which was Tesla also complained of side effects, which was slight hair loss and skin reddening. Is that just exposure from high frequencies, or would you say that is actual X-ray exposure?
Well, he was bombarding himself awful heavy, and some of his assistants received significant injury from some of the radiation from these tubes, but maybe that was part of the reason why Tesla kind of, went off the deep end later in life, is he was just bombarding his head with all of this radiation having a form that, we don't really know what it is. It's kind of different than what's used today, but all of that stuff has to be dealt with real caution. A lot of people in the primordial days of all of this science and technology, I think Madame Curie would be an example of that, what radium, the end result of playing around with radium, and all those people that, that painted the dials on the nuclear-powered light source for the clocks back in that era, they all died, and radio engineers that, that hooked big transmitting tubes up and in such a way that produced UHF parasitic oscillations, which they had no way to detect or measure. They were killed. So these invisible forces have to be dealt with a great amount of respect and caution.
Well, I think Griffin is in this call, and I hope he heard those words then, I guess. That's all I have.
Okay. Thanks, Calvin. Yeah, actually, we'll go ahead and conclude with Griffin. He has some comments on this. I'll go ahead and meet you out, Calvin. Okay. Yeah, Griffin?
Yeah, so in response to that, so in my line of work in this Tesla or shadowgraph study is that the intensity of these rays as percepted or measurable by a Geiger counter at some distance away, so that to no longer be under the influence of electrostatic interference, that the intensity is extremely great. So at point source about an inch, I've been able to measure about 300 Rontgen per hour emitting from the tube, and this is perceptible at about 40 feet away from the tube itself. So depending on the exposure, I have not been able to see any noticeable effects, but there definitely is something. I mean, comparing, like you said, with the example of Edison and Tesla himself, that what Tesla was receiving and his assistants, that's a form of acute radiation sickness. But nevertheless, even with that exposure, they would have received some type of AO cancer or some type of tumorous growth or some type of blood deformities or what have you. So, but then again, he lived to the age of 80-something, and so his assistants did not die so early. But then on the other hand, Edison's assistant did die. So there definitely is a distinction between these rays, and that's still yet to be discovered and studied.
Okay. Let's see. I guess we can go ahead and wrap up the call if you don't have any anything else to add, Eric or Griffin. Anything you want to announce or anything?
I think that pretty much covered everything. A lot of good questions this time around.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to keep hammering on the a couple previous live calls. I'll get those up first, and I'll get this up with some pictures and URLs and that kind of stuff. Yeah, any other comments, Griffin, or anything you want to announce before we end the call?
No, that pretty much sums it up.
Okay. And then early January, we're all going to be getting together down in Nevada, and I'll take plenty of pictures, and we'll be doing interviews and all kinds of stuff. And so I'll be posting those on YouTube at some point when I get back to Spokane, and everybody can kind of see, you know, an update of the progress and what we have going on. And so until then, we'll plan another live call, maybe after I get back. You know, maybe after the meetup down there. I'll have some catching up to do, and then we'll plan another call, maybe middle towards the end of January, and we'll just go from there. So, okay, well, thanks a lot, everybody, and then we'll see y'all later. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks. Have a good night, everyone.